Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a close look at something really fundamental, something that touches almost every family, how kids learn to read. Specifically, we're diving into this often debated idea, the balanced approach to reading instruction.
Yeah, and our source material for this deep dive, it's this really insightful document. It unpacks what educators claim about these, balanced approaches, and it gets into the history too, which is fascinating and frankly, pretty surprising. Plus, it lays out the compelling evidence that seems to overwhelmingly support systematic phonics. So here's the central question we're tackling for you today. Is this balanced approach really the best way, the most effective path to literacy for all kids? Or could a method that seems simpler, maybe more direct, actually give quicker, maybe even more profound results? Our mission here is to cut through some of that noise, give you the most important nuggets of knowledge from our source, and just make sure you're truly well informed on what is a really crucial topic. Okay, so let's start there. Let's unpack this concept of balanced literacy. We hear that term a lot from educators. What does it typically involve? What's the core idea?
Right. Well, what's truly fascinating here, and maybe a bit revealing, is that balanced literacy is often positioned as this sort of grand compromise. The idea is to combine phonics instruction with whole word methods, trying to get the best of both, But the catch, what the research often points to, is that this very attempt at compromise can inadvertently dilute the systematic nature of phonics teaching. And that systematic part is absolutely crucial for building those foundational reading skills, especially early on.
Okay, hold on. If it's a compromise, isn't the goal to get the best elements? What's the actual harm in trying to blend them? Practically speaking, I mean.
That's a really fair question. And the intention behind it, it's generally good. It typically does integrate some phonics, maybe alongside whole word recognition, sight words. And there's often a big focus on fostering a love for reading, through exposure to lots of different texts, focusing on the meaning. The challenge, though, as highlighted in, decades of research now, is that when phonics isn't the systematic, explicit foundation, students' decoding skills, their ability to sound out words, and ultimately their reading fluency, they can really suffer.
So the systematic part is key.
Exactly. Phonics instruction is just vital. It gives students the actual tools, the mechanics to sound out words. They learn the letter-sound relationships, and that's what lets them eventually read a huge number of words independently. What's truly, I think, revolutionary about phonics is how it empowers the reader. It's not just memorizing what a word is. It's like giving them a master key to unlock any word, even ones they've never encountered before. That's a fundamental difference. It moves from just memorization to actual mastery.
Okay. That master key idea is powerful. So how do the other methods, like whole word or sight word approaches, compare when a child hits a word they don't know?
Yeah, that's where the limitations often show up. Whole word methods, while they've certainly been popular, they tend to limit a child's ability when faced with unfamiliar words. And that becomes really critical as texts get more complex or vocabulary expands. A balanced approach might lean more on, say, guessing from context or using picture clues, focusing on the overall meaning. But that can fall short when the text isn't super predictable or when the words aren't on their memorized sight word list. And it really raises that important question. If the goal is true, independent literacy, how do students tackle the unknown if they haven't been explicitly taught the code to sound it out?
So when you boil it all down to results, student outcomes,
right,
where do these different approaches stand?
Well, the evidence seems pretty clear on this, actually. A systematic phonics-first approach generally produces quicker and more robust results, especially in terms of early literacy development. It's just more direct, more systematic. It builds that strong foundation right from the start.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. If phonics is so effective, so fundamental, why did this balanced idea or even the older whole word approach become so dominant for such a long time? Let's dig into that historical backdrop you mentioned.
It's quite a story, really. It's almost astounding when you look back. You have this major shift in education affecting millions.
Right.
And it seems it was driven less by hard data on reading and more by, pedagogical trends and philosophy. The move away from phonics, especially hitting its stride in the 20th century, was primarily fueled by these broader philosophical changes in how people thought about education itself, not by empirical evidence about reading. You had major thinkers, people like John Dewey, Horace Mann.
Right.
They were promoting ideas about learning that were more holistic, more child-centered, focused on development.
Right. I can see the appeal there. Dewey's ideas about learning through experience, focusing on creativity, engagement. That sounds good, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Couldn't you argue that a really strict phonics approach might feel too rigid, too mechanical, and actually, kill a kid's love of reading?
That was precisely the concern, and it was Dewey's concern, very explicitly. His progressive education philosophy really pushed for learning through experience, through engagement with big ideas, not through what he saw as basically rote memorization and drills. He genuinely believed phonics drills were too mechanical. He worried they'd stifle creativity, stifle that natural curiosity and love of learning. For Dewey, education needed to connect to real-world meaning, not just decoding skills. So his influence was huge. It directly contributed to the rise of the whole word method starting early in the 20th century. Phonics was de-emphasized in favor of learning words in context, focusing on meaning, this idea of a more natural path to reading. And this philosophy, it didn't just stay in academic circles, it became deeply embedded in teacher training programs. We're talking public universities, and surprisingly, as the source notes, even many Christian colleges adopted this.
Wow, even Christian colleges.
Yes. So generations of aspiring teachers were trained with the whole word approach presented as the progressive, the child-friendly way. And the result was that this philosophy, favoring meaning-first instruction over the mechanics of decoding, led many educators, including those in Christian education settings, to view phonics with skepticism, or sometimes even outright disdain. It really is a powerful example of how a prevailing philosophy can sometimes overshadow the evidence.
So, okay, this philosophical shift happens. It gets embedded in teacher training. What were the actual tangible consequences for students? For kids just trying to learn to read?
Well, the effects were pretty significant. And for a lot of children, quite detrimental, unfortunately. By downplaying systematic phonics, many kids, and this was true in Christian schools just as much as public schools, they really struggled. They might learn to memorize a certain number of sight words, maybe the common ones, but they weren't consistently being taught the underlying skills, the code, needed to tackle unfamiliar words.
The master key you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. They didn't have the tools to sound out words using the alphabetic principle, and this often didn't become a major problem until later grades when texts got harder, words got longer and less familiar, and suddenly they hit a wall. They simply lacked the independent decoding skills needed to unlock new texts.
So after decades of this being the dominant approach, what finally started to turn the tide? What's behind this current pushback towards evidence-based instruction?
It really comes down to the sheer weight of the evidence. The scientific research supporting phonics just kept accumulating, and that growing body of empirical evidence has been pivotal. It's led many educators, again including in Christian education circles, to re-embrace systematic explicit phonics. Research over the last, say, 30, 40 years has just consistently shown how essential phonics is for developing strong word recognition, fluency, and ultimately comprehension, especially in those crucial early years.
Was there a specific moment or report that really crystallized this?
Yes, a really key reference point is the National Reading Panel's report from the year 2000. This was a huge undertaking commissioned by the U.S. government, reviewing decades upon decades of reading research. And its conclusion was unambiguous. Systematic phonics instruction significantly improves reading achievement for all children, but particularly for those who find reading difficult. Essentially, rigorous scientific studies of how reading acquisition actually works just kept pointing back to the same thing. Teaching kids the code, teaching them how to decode using phonics, is the most effective foundation for long-term reading success.
It's just fascinating, isn't it, how the philosophical currents pushed one way for so long, while the research evidence was steadily building in another direction. Why do you think it took so long for that clarity from the research to really gain traction? And what does this shift mean for educators today, maybe especially those in Christian education contexts?
That's a critical point. The research was showing that while whole word methods might help kids memorize a small list of common words, it just doesn't equip them for the sheer volume and complexity of the language they'll encounter throughout their lives. Why the delay? Well, changing established practices in education is always hard. There's inertia, there are deeply held beliefs. But eventually, the evidence became too strong to ignore. There was a growing realization, I think, that we have to prioritize what actually works based on rigorous study, not just on appealing theories.
And for Christian educators specifically?
Well, today you see many Christian educators, just like their peers in public schools, strongly advocating for a phonics-first approach, particularly in kindergarten, first grade, second grade. The focus is ensuring students get those foundational decoding skills right from the start, so they can become fluent, independent readers. By really mastering the alphabetic principle, that core idea that letters represent sounds, students are, yes, better equipped to read the Bible effectively, but they also develop the robust skills needed to engage with all kinds of literature, complex academic texts, everything throughout their education and their lives. So yes, there's definitely been a significant push within Christian education, reflecting the broader trend, to return to phonics as the absolute bedrock of learning to read.
So let's bring this home for our listeners, maybe their parents, maybe educators themselves. What's the big takeaway from this deep dive into reading instruction?
I think the key takeaway is this. While that balanced literacy approach might sound appealing, maybe like a reasonable middle ground, the evidence strongly suggests that robust, explicit, systematic phonics instruction provides the most effective and, frankly, efficient path to early reading success. And it's really crucial to remember that the period where phonics declined, back in the 20th century, that was driven much more by shifts in educational philosophy than by solid evidence about how children learn to read best.
Right.
So connecting this to the bigger picture, it just highlights how important it is for all educators, including Christian educators, to stay informed by the current research and to prioritize teaching methods like explicit phonics that are proven to build those strong foundational skills. Ultimately, it's about giving students the tools not just to recognize a few words, but to truly unlock the entire world of written language.
Okay, and one final thought for you, the listener, to maybe chew on as you go about your day. Think about this historical tension we discussed, this pull between deeply held philosophies, whether in education or elsewhere, and what the actual empirical evidence shows. Where else in your own life, or in areas you follow, might you see this play out? Are there other balanced approaches out there that might, maybe unintentionally, be diluting effectiveness just for the sake of compromise? And what really happens, what are the potential gains when we make the choice to prioritize what the evidence is truly telling us? Something to think about.